Far out in the depths of an unexplored star system, a group of intrepid explorers had discovered something that would change the course of their lives forever. The planet they had landed on seemed quiet and desolate, the kind of barren rock that one might expect to find in the far reaches of the galaxy. However, beneath its surface lay a mystery, an abandoned human communication relay, old and rusted from ages past. The explorers had stumbled upon it entirely by accident, a piece of ancient history long forgotten. The communication beacon, with its faint, damaged signals, seemed to cry out for attention, almost as if it had been waiting for someone to find it. One of the explorers, Maris, was the first to notice the odd energy readings emanating from the relay station. She couldn't help but feel a sense of unease as she carefully approached the cracked and weathered console. The design of the machinery was unmistakably human, but not of any known origin. It wasn't from any of the settled colonies in the galaxy. It wasn't even from Earth, as far as anyone knew. It was something much older, an artifact from a time when humans had been scattered across the stars, before their civilization had been all but erased. As Maris wiped the dust away from the console, she uncovered a small glowing panel. The screen flickered to life, casting an eerie blue light on her face. She watched, mesmerized, as a message began to appear, static at first, then clearer as the technology booted up. The message was a faint signal, a whisper from a distant past, repeating over and over again in a language she barely understood. But she recognized one word: help. Without thinking, Maris activated the transmission system, sending a signal into the dark void of space. A signal that had been dormant for centuries, possibly millennia. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some random message. Someone had left this call for help, and she had just answered it. The others on her crew gathered around her, watching in silence as the message continued to loop. "What is it?" another crew member, Theron, asked. "It's a distress signal," Maris replied, her voice trembling. "But it's from Earth." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Earth was a myth, a place lost in the annals of history. The legend went that humans had once inhabited the planet, but it had been destroyed long ago, obliterated by a catastrophic event. But the signal was unmistakably human. They had all learned about Earth in history lessons, though the details were murky. It was the birthplace of humanity, the cradle of their civilization, but no one had ever truly known what happened to it. Some said the planet was lost to time. Others believed it had been destroyed by the very humans who once inhabited it, torn apart by war or some other disaster. But this signal, was evidence that something had survived. Someone had survived. The ship's captain, Sarah, stepped forward, her face set in determination. "We need to track the source of this signal. If Earth is out there, it changes everything." The crew began preparing the ship to leave the planet's orbit, but Maris couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. As they moved away from the planet and into the deeper void of space, something seemed off. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, as though the very air around them had thickened, charged with an unseen presence. A sudden blip on their radar snapped her out of her reverie. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A ship, a massive vessel, its dark silhouette barely visible against the backdrop of stars. The crew hurried to the cockpit to see what had triggered the alarm, and their eyes widened in shock. There in the distance was a fleet of ships, massive, black, and foreboding, their design unmistakably human. But these ships were unlike anything they had ever seen. "They're human," Theron whispered, his voice filled with awe and fear. Sarah narrowed her eyes, her hand gripping the control panel. "But who are they? And why are they here?" As they drew closer to the ships, the explorers realized they weren't alone. The human fleet had arrived, just as the signal had called out. The question was no longer if Earth had survived, but who had answered the call, and whether they were friend or foe. The air grew tense as the mysterious ships loomed ever closer. Maris felt a chill run down her spine. There was something unnerving about the way the ships moved, slow, deliberate, as though they had all the time in the universe. But they weren't just drifting aimlessly. They were waiting for something, waiting for them. "Whoever they are," Sarah said, her voice low. "They knew we'd find the signal." Maris's heart raced. The ships were now within firing range, and there was no turning back. The explorers had opened the door to something they couldn't yet understand. Something ancient, something dangerous, and something that might change everything they knew about humanity and their place in the galaxy. They were no longer in control. The message had been sent. The response had arrived. And with it, the unknown stood before them, ready to reveal its secrets. The explorers had barely processed the magnitude of the situation when the ships began to move. At first, it seemed like a slow, methodical approach, but as the colossal vessels edged closer, an undeniable tension filled the air. The once serene void of space now felt charged, as if it held its breath in anticipation. Maris and the others remained glued to the cockpit windows, their eyes tracking the dark ships that loomed like predators circling their prey. They were massive, far larger than any human ship the explorers had ever encountered. The shape of the vessels was almost like nothing they had ever seen before, sleek, angular, with jagged edges that gave them a menacing appearance. They weren't just ships. They were a statement, a message from the past, a reminder of the unknown forces that still lurked in the galaxy. Zara gripped the controls with white knuckles, her mind racing. What are they waiting for? She muttered under her breath. Her instincts screamed at her to prepare for battle, to get ready for whatever might come next. But no orders were given. Instead, they watched as the ships silently entered their orbit, hovering in place as if observing them. Maris, still in a daze, tried to make sense of the situation. She had seen technology from across the galaxy, from countless civilizations, but nothing quite like this. These ships weren't just relics. They felt alive, ancient beings that had been dormant for too long. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the words got stuck in her throat. Her gaze shifted to Xara, who remained as composed as ever, though Maris could see the underlying concern in her eyes. Without a word, the ships began to deploy what appeared to be smaller vessels, darting toward the planet below. Then back again, as though performing a reconnaissance mission. Maris's heart skipped a beat. Was this a test? An invasion? "Stay calm," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the silence. "We'll wait and see if they make contact." For what seemed like an eternity, nothing happened. The enormous ships hung in the stars like dark sentinels, motionless. The explorers began to feel the weight of isolation. Their communication channels were silent, their scans barely registering any data. The ship's technology was so advanced that it cloaked their intentions, and every signal sent out was either absorbed or bounced back with perfect precision. They were like shadows in the dark, and the explorers were powerless to do anything but watch and wait. Then a new blip appeared on their radar. But this time, it wasn't just a ship. The signature was unmistakable, human in origin, but unmistakably different. It was something they had not anticipated, the sudden activation of a human transmission. The voice that came through the static was low, gravelly, and deeply unsettling. "I see you," the voice said, its words slicing through the tension like a knife. "You shouldn't have answered the call, but you did. Now, you'll know what happens next." The message sent a chill through Maris. She looked at Sarah, who was already running her fingers over the control panel, attempting to trace the source of the transmission. But before they could react, the screen before them flickered to life, revealing a figure, a man, his face weathered by years of battle and survival, his eyes cold and unreadable. The figure spoke again, this time with a deep authority. "We are the last remnants of humanity. You may call us the exiles. We are the ones who survived when the earth fell. We are the warriors of the forgotten era. We have waited for this moment. Maris couldn't move. She felt like she was staring at the ghost of a bygone age, the very embodiment of humanity's dark history. She had read about Earth's ancient history, about the great wars, the rise and fall of civilizations, but she had never imagined that those stories were more than just that. Stories. Who are you? Sarah demanded, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. The figure on the screen smiled, though there was no warmth in it. You've awakened us, explorers. You've called us back. After 4,000 years, we answer your plea. The time has come for humanity to reclaim what was lost. Maris felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Reclaim what was lost. What did that even mean? The relics, the technology, the artifacts, they had all been hidden away for a reason. The Earth they had once known was gone, destroyed by its own people. And now, these mysterious humans, these exiles, had returned. What were they after? What was their purpose? Why are you here? Maris asked, unable to hold back any longer. Her voice shook, but she pressed on. What do you want from us? The figure's eyes narrowed. We want what was always ours, our birthright. You, explorers, are nothing more than pawns in this game. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to reclaim. Before Maris could process the full meaning of his words, the screen cut to black, and the transmission ended. The quiet, suffocating silence that followed was worse than anything they had experienced. The exiles were here, and they were not interested in diplomacy or peaceful solutions. They were here to take what they believed was theirs, and they would stop at nothing to get it. The explorers exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing. What had they gotten themselves into? How had a simple distress signal led them into the heart of a galactic conflict that had been dormant for millennia? They had no answers, only questions, and a growing sense of fear that they were about to be dragged into something far bigger than themselves. The exiles had made their presence known, but what would they do next? The explorers could only brace themselves for what was to come. The atmosphere on the ship grew thick with unease after the transmission cut out. The crew sat in stunned silence, each one grappling with the realization that they had unknowingly opened a door to something ancient and dangerous. Maris's mind raced, the image of the mysterious figure on the screen haunting her thoughts. The leader of the exiles had seemed almost human, but his words, his presence, carried a weight that felt far removed from the human race as they knew it. These were not the survivors of a lost colony or stranded travelers. They were something more formidable, something darker. Sarah paced back and forth in the cockpit, her brow furrowed with concentration. She could feel the tension pressing down on her chest, but she refused to let it control her. We need to understand who they are, and more importantly, why they're here. Maris nodded, still staring at the blackened screen where the exile leader had appeared. She hadn't been able to shake the chilling look in his eyes. It was a look that spoke of countless battles fought, of victories that came at unimaginable cost. These people weren't just survivors. They were warriors, and they had been waiting for something. She just couldn't figure out what. "Captain, we're getting another transmission." Theron's voice broke through her thoughts. He sounded tense, his fingers hovering over the communication panel. This time it's not a message. It's a direct link. Sarah nodded, signaling him to open the connection. The crew braced themselves, waiting for whatever would come next. Moments later, the screen flickered to life again. And there, standing in stark contrast to the cold, shadowy figures of the exiles, was the same man, the one who had spoken to them earlier. "Did you think you could simply summon us and expect to remain untouched?" The man's voice was a low growl, though his expression was unreadable. "You don't understand what you've done, explorers. You've awoken something far worse than you could ever comprehend." Maris's pulse quickened. There was no doubt in her mind now. These were not the peaceful, noble descendants of Earth's lost past. They were survivors of war, of a civilization built on destruction. The exiles had seen humanity's worst side, and they had embraced it. "You said we were pawns," Sarah said, her voice cold and controlled. "What game are we part of?" The man's lips curled into a twisted smile, but it wasn't a smile of amusement. It was a smile of dark satisfaction. "You're not just pawns. You are witnesses. You will witness the return of humanity's true legacy." The transmission blinked off, leaving nothing but static in its wake. Maris felt the weight of his words settle heavily in her chest. The exiles didn't just want to reclaim something. They wanted to restore a forgotten order. An order born from the ashes of the past, one forged through bloodshed and violence. These were the survivors of an Earth that had torn itself apart, and they had returned with a singular purpose: to reclaim what they had lost, regardless of the cost to those in their path. Sarah straightened, turning to face her crew. "We need to gather more information. We can't sit here and let them dictate the pace." But as she spoke, a sudden alarm blared through the ship. The flashing red lights cut through the darkness, and an unsettling sense of urgency flooded the crew. Maris felt her heart race as she watched Sarah move swiftly to the console, her fingers flying over the controls. "It's a fleet movement," Sarah said grimly. "They're heading toward the planet's surface. They're deploying ground forces." The rest of the crew exchanged nervous glances. Ground forces. They hadn't even begun to understand what the exiles were after. And now they were preparing for something far more terrifying than a simple space confrontation. "We can't let them land," Theron said, his voice tight with worry. "If they make it to the planet, there's no telling what they'll do. They're not here for peaceful purposes." Maris's mind raced. The exiles hadn't come to make contact or to ask for help. They were here to conquer, to reclaim the planet as their own. But there was something else, something darker, lurking beneath the surface of their actions. They weren't just after resources or technology. They were after something far more dangerous, something that could change the entire balance of power in the galaxy. "We need to stop them before they land," Maris said, her voice firm. "We don't have much time." Sarah nodded. "Get to the weapons bay. Prepare for a confrontation." As the crew scrambled to gather their weapons and make their final preparations, Maris couldn't shake the feeling that they were already too late. The exiles had been planning this for far too long. The fleet they had unleashed upon the planet wasn't just a signal of their return. It was a signal of war. As they raced toward the hangar bay, Maris's mind kept replaying the words of the exile leader. "You've awoken something far worse than you could ever comprehend." What did he mean by that? What kind of power did these exiles truly possess? And why had they waited so long to make their move? They had no answers, only the harsh reality that they were caught in a fight that had been years, even centuries, in the making. The human race, as they knew it, was gone. And now, they had to face the consequences of that long-lost past. The question was no longer whether they would survive. It was whether the galaxy itself would survive the return of the exiles. As the crew took their positions, ready to engage the enemy, Maris couldn't help but wonder, what if the exiles weren't just the last survivors of humanity, but the harbingers of its destruction? And if they truly did reclaim what they had lost, would there be anything left for the rest of the galaxy? The cold emptiness of space seemed to close in around the explorers as their ship made its way toward the planet's surface, trailing behind the massive fleet of the exiles. Maris couldn't shake the image of the exile leader's face, their cold, detached gaze that seemed to hold no compassion, no understanding of the consequences their actions would bring. He had spoken of a return, of humanity's legacy, but what kind of legacy was it? What kind of future did these people want to create? The explorers had no answers, only the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them as they neared the surface of the planet. The atmosphere outside their ship was thick with tension. Each passing moment felt like it brought them closer to something monumental, something that would change everything. As they approached their landing site, Sarah's voice rang through the comms. "Prepare for deployment. Once we land, we'll need to act fast. We don't know what we'll find down there, but we can't afford to hesitate." Maris nodded, her fingers trembling slightly as she gripped the control panel. The air inside the ship was thick with apprehension, every creak of the hull seeming to echo the uncertainty that had taken root in their hearts. The exiles were preparing to land their own forces, and the explorers had no idea what kind of resistance they would face once they hit the ground. The planet below was nothing like the lush green worlds they had visited in the past. It was barren, with jagged mountains and sprawling deserts stretching as far as the eye could see. The surface was cracked, scarred by eons of natural disasters and wars long forgotten. It was a place that felt abandoned, desolate, a fitting home for the exiles who had wandered the void for millennia. As their ship touched down, the explorers were greeted with an eerie silence. No birds, no wind, just the hum of their own equipment and the distant rumble of the exile fleet. The ground was hard beneath their boots, and the dry air burned their lungs as they stepped out into the unforgiving landscape. Zara led the way, her face set in grim determination. Behind her, Maris followed, feeling a weight in her chest that she couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just the fear of what might come next. It was something deeper, a sense that the exiles were not just returning to reclaim the planet. They were returning to something far more dangerous, something that had been hidden away for far too long. As they moved through the rocky terrain, they began to see signs of life. Wreckage, broken machinery, and structures half buried in the sand. It was clear that the exiles had once inhabited this place, but something had driven them away. What had happened here? What had they been hiding from? Zara's voice cut through Maris's thoughts. "Keep your eyes open. Whatever the exiles are after, it's here. And we're going to stop them." The crew moved cautiously, staying low and keeping their weapons ready. Every shadow, every movement in the distance, made their nerves fray just a little more. The quiet of the landscape was unnerving. It felt like a place where time had stopped, where the remnants of an ancient civilization lay waiting to be discovered or desecrated. As they reached a series of crumbling ruins, the sense of dread that had been building inside Maris finally broke. She could feel it in the air, the presence of something old, something powerful. There was an energy here, something far beyond the simple remnants of a fallen society. The exiles were not just looking to reclaim a planet. They were searching for something, something buried deep within these ruins. And that's when she saw it. A massive structure stood at the center of the ruins. Tall, angular, and dark, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift in the dim light. It looked ancient, but its design was unmistakably human. Maris's breath caught in her throat as she realized what they had found. A relic of Earth's forgotten past, something that had been sealed away for a reason. The exiles were not just after the planet. They were after this. Whatever it was, it held the key to their plans. The question was, what exactly were those plans? Suddenly, the air around them crackled, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The explorers exchanged startled glances as the unmistakable sound of a massive engine hummed in the distance. It was the exile fleet, already beginning to deploy its forces. They had reached the planet's surface. They were moving quickly, and there was no time to waste. Zara's voice rang out again. "Move. We need to reach the heart of that structure before they do." The crew pushed forward, but Maris couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Every step they took seemed to echo in the silence, and every sound in the distance made her jump. The exiles weren't far behind, and the closer they got to the structure, the more she felt a sense of impending doom. What was it about this place that had drawn them here? What had they been hiding for centuries? They reached the entrance of the massive structure, a doorway so large that it seemed to swallow the light. Maris hesitated for only a moment before she stepped inside. The darkness was thick, suffocating, and the air inside was heavy with the scent of ancient decay. As they moved deeper into the building, the walls began to pulse with a strange energy, the symbols etched on the surfaces glowing faintly. There was a hum in the air, like the building itself was alive, as if it had been waiting for something, or someone, to awaken it. Then, they found it. In the center of the structure, suspended in midair, was an object. It was encased in a transparent shell, and as they approached, Maris could feel its power, its sheer magnitude. It was a relic, ancient and dangerous, and it hummed with a dark energy that she couldn't quite comprehend. The exiles were here for this, and they would stop at nothing to get it. Sarah looked at the object, her eyes narrowing. We can't let them have it. Whatever it is, we have to destroy it. But Maris knew it wasn't that simple. This wasn't just any artifact. It was something far more dangerous, something that could change the course of the galaxy. And as the explorers stared at it, they realized with a sinking feeling that they had just uncovered the true purpose of the exiles' return. They weren't here to reclaim a planet. They were here to reclaim power, an ancient forbidden power, and in doing so, they would unleash something far worse than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The hum of the relic vibrated through the air, sending ripples of energy that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Maris stood motionless, staring at the object suspended within its protective shell. It was beautiful in an unsettling way, its surface smooth and dark, yet shimmering with a strange energy that illuminated the cavernous space. The symbols etched into the walls seemed to react to the object, flickering in unison as though they recognized it. Maris's stomach twisted in a knot as the weight of the situation settled over her like a suffocating fog. The exiles were here for this, and they would stop at nothing to claim it. But what was it? What power did it hold that was so significant, so dangerous that it had been hidden away for thousands of years? Zara, standing beside her, exhaled sharply. We can't let them take it. We can't let this, whatever it is, fall into their hands. Maris nodded, but her thoughts were clouded. The exiles weren't just interested in reclaiming a lost planet. They were after this object, this relic, and its potential. But what would happen if they succeeded? What horrors had humanity once unlocked with this power? And if the exiles had waited this long to return for it, what had they been planning all these years? A distant rumble interrupted her thoughts, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots against the rocky terrain outside. The exiles were closing in, their forces now just outside the structure. The explorers had no time left. They're here, Theron said, his voice tense. He peered through the entrance into the darkening sky beyond. We can't hold them off much longer. If they breach this place, we need to act now. Sarah interrupted, her eyes narrowing in determination. She turned back to the relic, her hands moving instinctively over her weapon, but Maris noticed the hesitation in her gaze. It wasn't fear, it was something else, something deeper. Sarah took a step forward, the weight of the moment pressing on her like an unbearable burden. We have two choices. We can try to destroy it, or we can take it and keep it out of their hands. But either way, we have to act quickly. Maris opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, a sharp, eerie noise echoed through the structure, like the sound of machinery coming to life. The symbols on the walls flickered again, and the air became charged, humming with an intensity that set her teeth on edge. "What's happening?" she asked, her heart pounding in her chest. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her voice tight. "It's as if the structure itself is waking up, responding to the object." The ground beneath them rumbled as the massive doors to the chamber began to slowly close. The exiles were almost here, and whatever had been dormant for millennia was now stirring in response to the energy of the relic. It was like the entire place was alive, and it was reacting to their presence, to the threat that the exiles posed. "We don't have time to think," Sarah said, pulling herself together. "Theron, you stay and hold the entrance. Maris and I will try to figure out how to neutralize this thing." Maris wanted to protest, but she didn't. Sarah was right. The exiles would soon be upon them, and they couldn't afford to hesitate. As much as Maris feared what might happen, she knew that they had no other choice but to face whatever was coming. The exiles had already unleashed chaos. If they succeeded in taking the relic, who knew what would happen? The air in the chamber was thick with an unnatural heat as Maris and Sarah moved closer to the relic. It seemed to pulse with energy, each beat of its rhythm resonating with their very beings, almost as if it were speaking to them, calling to them. "Let's try to disable the power source," Sarah suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Maris stepped forward, her eyes locked on the object. She reached out with trembling hands, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the protective shell. A jolt of electricity shot through her body, sending a shockwave of pain up her arm. She gasped, pulling her hand back instinctively. The object, though encased, seemed to resist her touch, almost as if it were rejecting her. "I think it's protecting itself," she said through clenched teeth. Sarah moved to her side, her brow furrowing in concentration. "We need to figure out how to break through it. If we can get inside, we might be able to disable it or—" Suddenly, the door behind them crashed open with a deafening bang, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Maris spun around to see the exiles pouring into the chamber, their footsteps heavy and sure. The leader of the exiles stood at the front, his face cold and unmoving, his eyes fixed on the relic with an intensity that made Maris's blood run cold. "You've made a grave mistake," the exile leader's voice rang out, steady and unyielding. "This relic is ours, and you will not stand in our way." Maris's heart hammered in her chest as the exiles moved in, their weapons raised. They had no intention of negotiating. The explorers were in their way, and they would deal with them as they saw fit. Without thinking, Maris pulled her weapon from her side, aiming it at the approaching soldiers. Sarah followed suit, her hand steady on her weapon, her eyes never leaving the leader of the exiles. There was no escape now, not for the explorers, not for anyone. The exiles were here, and they would stop at nothing to get what they had come for. The leader's voice broke through the tension. "This will be over soon. You cannot stop what is inevitable." But Maris didn't care about his words. She knew they couldn't stop the exiles by force alone, not with their numbers and their technology. The only way to prevent disaster was to destroy the relic, whatever the cost. With a grim look exchanged between them, Maris and Sarah lunged toward the object, determined to find a way to neutralize its power before the exiles could use it. The air crackled with energy as the exile soldiers moved closer, but in that moment, there was only one thing that mattered: the relic. The exiles had come for it, and now, the explorers had to make their final stand. To keep the galaxy from descending into chaos, they had to prevent the exiles from unlocking its full potential. Time was running out, and the fate of everything hung in the balance. Maris's breath quickened as she pushed forward. This was it. This was the moment that would define everything. The air inside the chamber crackled with tension as Maris and Sarah rushed toward the relic, their eyes locked on the pulsating object at its center. The exiles had flooded into the space behind them, their weapons trained, their presence a reminder of the sheer danger the explorers were now facing. The sound of boots against stone reverberated through the walls, mingling with the unnatural hum of the relic's energy. Each beat, each pulse from the object felt like it was drawing them closer to the inevitable, a fate they couldn't escape. Zara's hand shot out, gripping Maris's wrist. "We can't just destroy it without understanding it. If we do, who knows what will happen?" Maris nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She understood the stakes. The relic wasn't just a power source. It was something far more complex, something that had been hidden away for millennia. It could have the power to reshape entire civilizations, but it could just as easily annihilate them. Whatever it was, whatever it represented, the exiles were willing to go to any length to possess it. But time was slipping away. The exiles were closing in, their presence like a suffocating cloud of danger. Maris could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, and there was no way out. The leader of the exiles stepped forward, his face emotionless, his eyes cold as he regarded Maris and Sara with disdain. "Do you think you can keep it from us?" His voice was a low, guttural growl, each word heavy with authority. "You have no idea what this relic is, what it can do." Maris's hand tightened around her weapon, her fingers aching with the pressure. "We understand enough, and we won't let you have it." Sara stood beside her, her gaze unwavering as she spoke. "We know you won't stop until you have it. But what you don't know is that using it could destroy everything. This relic wasn't meant to be wielded. It was locked away for a reason." The exile leader's lips curled into a slight mirthless smile. "You still don't understand. You're not here to stop us, explorers. You're here to witness the birth of a new order. Humanity's true legacy will be restored, and with it, a power greater than any of you could ever comprehend." The words struck Maris like a cold slap. She had always believed that the remnants of Earth's legacy were something to be studied, something to be understood. But this was different. This was a twisted vision of humanity's past, a legacy built on bloodshed and power, and the exiles were determined to use it to reignite an ancient flame of destruction. The air in the chamber grew thick with a strange energy, and the ground beneath their feet trembled. The relic's hum grew louder, its frequency vibrating through Maris's bones. She could feel it calling to her, as if it were alive, waiting for something. But what? What did the exiles intend to do with this power? And what would happen if they succeeded? The leader took another step forward, his presence like a shadow looming over them. "You can't stop what is coming. You don't even know the true nature of what you're trying to prevent. We are not just reclaiming power, we are bringing about a new dawn. The age of the weak is over. The strong will rise again, and they will be the ones to shape the future." Maris's mind raced. She had seen the destruction humanity had wrought in the past, wars that had torn apart entire worlds, civilizations that had fallen to their own arrogance and cruelty. But this was different. The exiles were not seeking to rebuild, they were seeking to dominate. They wanted to create a future where power was everything, and those who couldn't wield it would be swept aside. As the leader of the exiles raised his hand, his soldiers moved into position, their weapons aimed at Maris and Sara. The time for negotiation had passed. They had no choice now. The explorers had to fight. "We won't let you destroy everything," Maris said, her voice barely above a whisper, though her words rang with conviction. Sara's voice echoed the same resolve. "If you want it, you'll have to go through us." But even as she spoke, Maris could feel the relic's power growing stronger, pulling her in like a magnetic force. The exiles weren't just after its power, they wanted to control it. And the longer they lingered here, the more the relic would begin to reveal its true nature. Suddenly, without warning, the relic's shell cracked open, a deafening sound that reverberated through the chamber. The air grew heavy with the scent of burning ozone, as the energy from the object flooded the room, filling every corner with a brilliant, blinding light. The exiles faltered for a moment, their eyes squinting against the searing brightness. Maris felt the energy surge through her, rushing into her very soul. She couldn't pull away, couldn't escape the overwhelming sensation. The relic wasn't just a tool of destruction, it was something far more complex. It wasn't simply meant to be wielded, it was meant to be understood, to be unlocked. And in that moment, she understood the exiles' true goal. They were not seeking power for themselves. They were seeking a way to control the force that had created the galaxy, to bend it to their will. But at what cost? As the light began to recede, Maris was left with the knowledge that she could no longer simply stand by. The exiles weren't just interested in the relic. They wanted to use it to rewrite history, to force the galaxy into a new, darker age. They wouldn't hesitate to use the relic to reshape everything, to annihilate those who stood in their way. She glanced at Sara, who was already preparing for the next move, her eyes filled with a determination that matched Maris's own. The relic was no longer just a piece of ancient technology. It was a weapon, and it was up to them to stop it from falling into the wrong hands. Zara's hand shot out, gripping Maris's wrist as she nodded toward the exile leader. "We take it out now. If we don't, they'll use it to destroy us all." In that moment, Maris understood. This wasn't just about stopping the exiles. It was about preventing the galaxy from falling into darkness, about ensuring that the relic's power would never be used to tear everything apart again. With a final, resolute glance, Maris and Sarah surged forward, weapons raised, determined to do whatever it took to prevent the exiles from succeeding. The fight had only just begun, and the stakes had never been higher. Whatever happened next, the future of the galaxy and the legacy of humanity would be decided in this chamber. The chamber was alive with energy, a pulsating, crackling force that reverberated through the walls and into the very bones of the explorers. Maris could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, the sense of inevitability that seemed to hang in the air. The relic, now fully unleashed, hummed with a power that felt ancient and unfathomable. It was as if the entire galaxy had been waiting for this moment, the return of a force so immense that it threatened to unravel everything they knew. Sarah moved forward, her weapon still raised, but her eyes were locked on the exile leader, who stood unmoving in the center of the chamber. The soldiers behind him had not advanced. They were waiting, watching, and for the first time since the explorers had arrived on this forsaken planet, Maris realized that the exiles were not the true danger here. The relic, whatever it was, held the true power. It was the catalyst that could set everything into motion. "We don't need to fight," the exile leader said, his voice calm, almost soothing, but it held an edge of something darker. "You cannot comprehend what you are up against. This relic is more than just a weapon. It is the key to rewriting the history of the galaxy, to shaping the future. It was meant for us. It was meant for humanity." Maris shook her head, the words swirling in her mind, but failing to make sense. The exiles had spent thousands of years wandering, searching for this power, and now they were so close. But it wasn't just power they sought, it was control. They had come to reclaim not just their birthright, but to reshape everything in their image. "You're wrong," Maris said, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside her. "This relic wasn't meant to be wielded. It was sealed away for a reason. And if you use it, you'll destroy everything." The exile leader's expression remained unchanged, but the air seemed to thicken around him, as though his presence alone was enough to bend the atmosphere to his will. "You are naive," he said, almost pityingly. "You don't understand. This relic is the key to our salvation. It will restore humanity to its rightful place at the center of the universe. You should be helping us. Together, we can control everything. The galaxy will bend to our will." Maris's stomach twisted. The weight of his words settled into her mind like a poison, and for a moment, she felt the pull of the relic's energy. There was power there, unimaginable power, and the exiles had spent centuries dreaming of wielding it, but Maris couldn't let them. The galaxy had already seen enough of that kind of ambition. Earth had fallen because of it. Countless worlds had been destroyed because of it. She couldn't allow the exiles to reshape history. "We won't help you," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "And neither will anyone else. You've spent so long searching for this, but in the end, you're nothing more than the remnants of a lost civilization. Your time is over." The exile leader's eyes darkened, the coldness in them sharpening like the edge of a knife. "You think you can stop this? You think you can stop us?" His words sent a shiver down Maris's spine, and she could feel the weight of his resolve pressing down on them. The exiles were not just a threat. They were a symbol of humanity's darkest tendencies, the remnants of an era built on destruction and conquest. They believed that the galaxy had to be ruled, that only the strong should survive. And they would use the relic to prove it. Before Maris could respond, the relic's energy surged again, its hum reaching a deafening crescendo. The walls of the chamber groaned as if they were being torn apart, and the relic's light intensified, filling the room with an otherworldly glow. The exiles stepped forward, their hands reaching toward the relic as though they were drawn to it by some invisible force. The leader raised his hand, and the energy of the relic seemed to respond to his command. "Stop," Sarah shouted, but her voice was barely audible over the rising cacophony of power. The exile leader turned, his eyes glowing with a fierce, almost manic intensity. "You don't understand. This is the future. The galaxy will fall in line, and humanity will be the ones to lead it." Maris's heart pounded in her chest. They couldn't let him reach it, couldn't let him harness its power. If the exiles succeeded, it would be the end of everything they knew. The universe would fall into darkness, ruled by those who sought to control, to dominate. "Sarah, we have to destroy it," Maris shouted. Sarah nodded, her expression resolute. "We don't have much time. We can't let them use it. Not after everything we've seen." They rushed toward the relic, pushing through the crackling energy, the very air seeming to resist their every move. The exile soldiers advanced, their weapons raised, but they were too late. Sarah and Maris reached the object, and with a determined glance between them, they set to work. The relic's energy surged violently, as if it were fighting against them, but they pushed forward, knowing that if they didn't act, it would be the end of everything. Maris's hands flew over the controls, her mind racing to piece together the technology that had been hidden away for centuries. The walls shook as the exiles tried to force their way toward them, but they were too far. The relic's energy began to twist and warp, a terrible, pulsing mass of power that threatened to consume everything in its path. "Almost there," Maris muttered, her voice trained with effort. The relic's energy surged again, and a blinding light enveloped the chamber. For a brief moment, Maris could feel the entire universe collapsing around her, as though time itself had fractured. And then, in a single desperate motion, they activated the final sequence. The relic's light flared one last time, brighter than the sun, and then nothing. Silence. The power that had once radiated from the relic seemed to vanish, leaving behind only an emptiness, a hollow quiet that stretched into the void. Maris stood frozen, her breath coming in sharp gasps, her body trembling from the sheer force of the energy she had just released. She dared not move, not yet. Slowly, she turned to look at Sarah. There was no more light, no more energy. The relic had been neutralized. Behind them, the exiles stood motionless, their expressions unreadable. The leader's gaze was cold, filled with a silent rage. But he said nothing. The power that had driven them for so long was gone, and with it, their hopes of reclaiming the galaxy. Maris's heart sank. They had won, but the cost was immeasurable. The exiles were not just a threat. They were a reminder of the darker side of humanity, of the dangers that arose when power was left unchecked. They had stopped the worst of it, but Maris knew that this victory wouldn't erase the scars left behind. The galaxy had been spared, this time, but the question lingered in her mind. Would they ever be truly free from the shadows of the past? As she stood there, watching the exiles retreat into the darkness, Maris couldn't help but wonder what the future held. The galaxy had been saved, but for how long? How long before another force, another relic, another power would emerge, threatening to consume everything they had fought so hard to protect? For now, there was silence, and in that silence, they could finally breathe. But deep in her heart, Maris knew this was just one battle in a war that would never truly end.